good work against the Phoenix deck this weekend, 3-0 against it here. And that's exactly what he faces in the hands of Matti Kuisma.
Yeah. We already got to see some of Carlos's deck in a pretty epic match against Paulo Vitor. And, but that was a match that unfortunately ended up in a timeout. I don't think we're going to see that here, though. We're playing against a different deck here. And Carlos is much more comfortable with this matchup specifically. It's a pretty straightforward affair. Deal with all your opponent's threats and then take over the late game.
That's right. Let's see how this plays out in the early stages. We see not a whole lot going on for Carlos. He can brainstorm if he'd like.
Yeah, and you already see Matti kind of tanking a little bit here. And the reason being is, he's got that brainstorm in hand, and he does have that kind of combination that's quite strong, which is, brainstorm into Stormwing Entity. But he's going for the brainstorm into Fabled Passage here, it looks like, potentially, which, given the fact that he's got 3 lands in hand, probably stronger.
Well, if you had to come up with a clever nickname for that sequence, what might you come up with?
Which one?
For the brainstorm into Stormwing Entity sequence.
I don't know, but I think you're going to have something very clever.
No, I was just asking you. I mean, I already dropped it on you when we were practicing, but
I must have forgotten.
You don't remember the Brainstormwing Entity combo?
See, whenever I hear ridiculous things, my brain, I think, just kind of filters it out.
Does it just shut it out? It doesn't even get stored?
It didn't happen, Marshall.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. I know where you built up the years of training.
I was literally going to say, being good friends with Luis Garvargas for so long, I am kind of immune to ridiculousness at this point.
Yeah, that's probably why you can't store that kind of stuff anymore. It's just full. Right? No more room.
I'm maxed out.
Yeah. All right, here comes Narset. Parter avails the doors open to resolve a Narset, and Carlos says, "Thank you very much. I will do so." Even has a choice on 3 different cards here: Brainstorm, Memory Lapse, or Heartless Act. Decides to take the Heartless Act into hand.
A nice answer to Stormwing Entity, which Carlos currently doesn't have an answer to. And at least based on what we see in the hand, we might just go ahead and see a Pillar of Flame into a Stormwing Entity. Matty's going to have to fight through these Heartless Acts anyways, but just being able to tick Narset down to 1 so Carlos can't find an extra card, while also just getting that Scribe from the Stormwing Entity is pretty valuable here.
Right, gets a presence on the battlefield of some sort. Of course, this deck does need that. It kind of attacks on 2 axes now, right? One of them is like the Stormwing Entity, Sprite, Dragon, kind of put something out and start beating down with it. But then seems like there's always the Arclight Phoenix or 2 in the yard that's looming, waiting for, if you do answer that initial wave, then boom, 2 of them are coming in and hitting you the next turn.
Yeah, and this is also just what makes this deck so powerful against any deck that's looking to kind of grind you out, right? It's just like, okay, you've killed my dragons, you've spent a bunch of 1-for-1 removals on my creatures, but how are you going to stop me returning a couple of Phoenixes over and over again throughout the course of a game, right? I mean, we kind of saw that yesterday, where we saw the 5-color Niv Mizzet deck just use a bunch of removal spells. It looked pretty good, and then all of a sudden, Eli Loveman returned 3 Arclight Phoenix from the graveyard, and it was over.
Right. So Narset's going to have to just sit on the battlefield in passive ability mode for now.
That's a lot of action. Crackling Drake. Now, this is a card that a lot of people have been shaving down on in this deck, as it's a little bit on the slower side. But in this specific matchup, it seems pretty strong.
Yeah, down to 1 for Matti Kuisma, but there it is. It's a good card.
Yeah.
They used to run more.
Yeah, I mean, decks used to run 2, sometimes even 3. And a lot of people have actually chosen to have favored the Stormwing Entity instead. Stormwing Entity was a card that was typically played in maybe as a 2 of, and it's now kind of gone all the way up to potentially 4 in a lot of these decks.
Yeah, Crackling Drake in the late game, if it ends up being one of the last cards out of your hand after the dust settles, it replaces itself. And it's very common for it to be 8, 9, 10 power, even higher sometimes in the late game. It can kill your opponent in 1 hit or sometimes 2. Looks like Matti wants to keep both of these and is just deciding what order to get them.
Yeah, tough call here. I mean, the Sprite Dragon does represent a hasty threat here, so that if Carlos does have an answer for the Stormwing Entity, he can get that Narset off the battlefield.
Yeah, there's also kind of the test spell factor, right? Like, how many removal spells do you have, Carlos? You will have to use one of them on a Sprite Dragon. Like, it's only 2 mana, but it'll become a 5/5 by next turn if you don't kill it. So you're probably going to have to, and maybe that makes it a little more likely that
Nice.
that the Drake stays alive.
Yeah, now he's just going for the attack on the Pillar Flame on the Narset instead, and this allows him to somewhat play around a potential Shark Typhoon, right? You run out the Pillar Flame. Now, if you attack with both creatures and Carlos does have a Shark Typhoon for 3, at the very least, you can trade your Sprite Dragon for a Shark Typhoon that Carlos might have.
Smart. And I wonder what Carlos is going to do, because he could also Fatal Push instead.
I imagine he's inclined to just use all of his mana here and go for the Shark Typhoon, as the Fatal Push is just such an efficient spell.
Yeah. It is interesting, Paul, because as much as the worst case scenario for Matti isn't too bad, you could definitely say the same here for Carlos. I mean, he's getting a Sprite Dragon off the battlefield and drawing a card. That's a pretty darn good use of his mana, too. He did take 5.
He did. And he doesn't currently have an answer to the Storming Entity, which he will need to find at some point. But, I mean, at least if you're on Matty's side, I mean, given that he hasn't found any Arclight Phoenix, this is still a pretty reasonable draw here, right? He got to kind of sculpt out his draws. And one card that I want to point out is a very techie card here that you don't see that often, at least in the main, is the Ox of Agonis. He's got an Ox of Agonis, which is really, really good against control decks, right?
That's so brutal.
You just completely empty out your hand, play out all of your threats, and boom, you run out the Ox. Hey, if they counter it in some way, you can still escape it most likely.
It's funny because I know the Ox is red, but it's the green light, man. It's just like, dump your hand, go, you were thinking, oh, should I maybe hold back? Nope. Just run it right out there. Now, the interesting side of this too, so we see Memory Lapse hit the Drake. You see Extinction Event now in hand for Carlos. That could be really important. But yeah, see, this is what I was thinking. He would like to use it to kill the entity. He kind of needs to. But if that Ox gets to actually hang around, it will come back again.
Yeah, well, the nice thing, at least for if you're Carlos, is you're going to be able to kind of stall out at least for a few turns. We've got a lapse here. There's another lapse on top. So we're just going to see the same thing play out at least for the next turn. And then Carlos is going to start having to actually use his counter magic, like that Saw It Coming that you see. Or
okay,
just the thing is, he's going to want to counter that anyways, right? So
but he didn't memory. Yeah, okay, there we go.
Yeah, but the thing now though is, like, you're going to memory lapse the Ox the first time, but I mean after that it's going to resolve. And it's going to draw Matti 3 cards.
Right, and if you can't exile it, it either kills you on the ground or it comes back from the yard at some point, and it's not good news for Carlos either way. Now, again, he does have the ability to stem the bleeding here with a Memory Lapse, but there's just really nowhere to go,
Yeah.
Because Carlos has some cool little combos built into this deck, too. They don't come up super often, but Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, can mill the card that you memory lapse, but it doesn't work against the Ox.
Actually, what's kind of funny is the Thoughtseize looks like a dead draw, but because of the Ox, probably is going to get something here. But
it's rough.
But Carlos is in trouble here. I mean,
definitely.
He doesn't have a way to kill this Ox, and Matti drew just straight gasoline here.
He sure did.
Off of this Ox of Agonis. Iteration Opt and Arclight Phoenix.
Wow. Carlos has to be thinking, what in the heck?
And we talk about how good Arclight Phoenix is when you can just play it off the yard. It's also not bad as just a 4-mana beater, especially against a control deck, right? You see these decks boarding in all this graveyard hate, and you're just like, all right, whatever. 4 mana, 3/2, go to your face. Please deal with it.
Faithless Looting, Arclight Phoenix, Opt.
Probably opting to see if he can find another Phoenix potentially, right?
Yeah, or maybe a third spell. It's a brainstorm,
Yeah.
so that does give you the green light to Faithless Looting the Arclight Phoenix away. And bring it back.
I guess there might be a tiny concern for Cling to Dust,
Sure.
as Carlos does play one copy of that card.
Where you might look back and go, I could have just cast the Arclight Phoenix. Like, why did I
Exactly.
get cute? Yeah.
Now, Carlos does have the answer for Arclight Phoenix in play right now. He does have a Blast Zone set on 4.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Matty's just choosing to run it out because if Carlos kills it in some way, next turn he can just probably get it back with that Brainstorm and Faithless Looting in his hand.
Yeah, good planning here by Matti Kuisma, recognizing, well, I'm going to lose it anyway, but if I lose it by hard casting it, then I can get it back with Faithless Looting and Brainstorm. And look at that, Island off the top, Shadow's Verdict dead in hand, and a concession from Carlos Romao. We're going into game number 2 here, Paul, and that did not go well for Carlos at all.
Yeah, I mean, Matty just got to dig and see so many cards, with the Brainstorm and scry stuff away with the Stormwing Entity that, Carlos wasn't able to find enough good card advantage engines of his own to kind of deal with all the threats. And again, I mean, it was that Ox.
It was
right?
the Ox.
That Ox was phenomenal. It was the threat that closed out the game, but more importantly, it just found Matty 3 additional cards, all of which ended up being spells.
Yeah, it felt like there was a lot of 1-for-1s, a lot of 2-for-1s from our players. But ultimately, it ended up roughly equal, which normally you'd think that would favor the control player. But in this case, the Ox changed that. I mean, it's a 4-for-1, right? And in this case, it was, much more than that. And the fact that it's also a threat and a reasonable one at 4 power really is a handful for Carlos. Like, he needs to find a way to get that Ox into the graveyard and then get rid of it from the graveyard before it can come back from escape.
Yeah, and take a look too here. Matty actually just going down to 2 Faithless Lootings, meaning he doesn't have a whole lot of ways to put that Arclight Phoenix in the yard. But again, in this matchup, casting Arclight Phoenix is just a very good play. Your opponent goes turn 3 Narset, activates it. What's better? You just run out that Arclight Phoenix, and it's a nice way to just get it off the battlefield.
Rough opener here for Carlos. Island with Brainstorm, but really needs to find black mana
that's a
in
mulligan.
particular. Yeah, and that one's going to go back. Because that's the one where if you Brainstorm and don't see lands, you're dead. I mean,
not just that. If you're Brainstorm and you hit a land, you're still you're going to put 2 spells on top of your library. You're going to need to find another Brainstorm or a shuffle effect to get rid of all the other spells in your hand. So I mean, that's one of those situations where a second land's not going to do it. You don't have something like an Expressive Iteration or anything like that to filter out the rest of your cards.
Right. Watery Grave into Castle Lochthwain here for Carlos. It looks like he's going to hold off on the Thoughtseize for now. He's got Memory Lapse available.
And Matty's got, oh no, not turn 3 yet. So I imagine Matty's probably just going to wait till turn 3 to try to go for opt into Storming Entity on turn 3. The downside of running out the opt now is that if you don't find a spell to fire off, all of a sudden you can't play a threat on turn 3.
Mm-hmm. Here's the Thoughtseize, though, and this is going to kind of break up the party here for Kuisma. Interestingly, the opt might be the thing to take as there's 2 Stormwing Entity. Normally, Carlos would probably prefer to just take away the threats whenever he has the option to do so, but kind of interesting spot here.
Yeah, opt does seem like the good take here. It really just makes it so that Matty's hand doesn't do anything for the next 5 turns or 3 turns.
He's cold ripping a Brainstorm though, right? Like,
I mean, the other option is maybe taking a Mystical Dispute. You could consider that, or maybe a Storming Entity, and you're just like, look, I'm just gonna make sure that I just fight through all of your threats. Yeah. You can go for opt into Storming Entity, and I can just Memory Lapse your Storming Entity, right?
Right,
and then you're
I can
forced to
Baleful
find another
Mastery
spell.
one later. Yeah, no, that brute force might just be the way to go for Carlos. Now, if I'm Carlos, I am a little worried about that plan right now, just given the fact that I don't really have any way to continually draw cards this game yet. So that's kind of the missing piece here. Brainstorm, and there's also Fabled Passage, so That could help, though.
Wow,
His hand
that's a
looks
good one.
pretty strong. What was it? Iteration?
Expressive iteration here off the top. So, but it looks like Maddie's going to go for um, the opt into the Storming Entity, but now he's got a mystical dispute here to kind of break up the memory lapse. You saw that he actually chose to play it patiently, didn't go for the opt into Storming Entity play on turn 3, and actually choosing to wait until he has potentially counterspell backup here to go for the Storming Entity.
And he feels like he does here with the Mystical Dispute back up here.
Yeah, and if you're on Carlos's side, all right. Okay, you know what? This if you're on Carlos's side, this makes sense because you're like, okay, this sequencing is odd. Why did you go for it this turn? And it makes sense because Carlos knows Maddie's hand. He knows that there's a mystical dispute, right? So
Right.
instead, he's just going to go for an end of turn Baleful Mastery here to get the Storming Entity off the board, knowing that the mystical dispute, right? We're so used to mystical dispute countering everything. Of course, that's not the case.
It does
It's only
feel
blue
like
spells. So you can use the Baleful Mastery instead to get that Storming Entity.
Ooh, and there's a Thoughtseize as well.
Yeah, and this is probably taking the iteration, I would guess. This is a pretty grindy matchup, and iteration just gives you 2 cards. There is a Faithless Looting, of course, and there's that Arclight Phoenix in play, but I think
Yeah.
Carlos is... Go ahead. I
was
think Carlos is just more interested in just making sure that Maddie doesn't get ahead on cards.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. Carlos seems to be content with 1-for-1ing threats, taking away the different methods that Maddie has of getting ahead on cards. But again, in order for this plan to work, Carlos needs to be able to get ahead on cards. He can't just 1-for-1 all day long. Eventually, Maddie's going to draw ways to get ahead himself.
Maddie deciding whether or not to play out this dispute. He knows that Carlos has already played around it, right? So maybe it's just better to just run out this dispute and get whatever you can. His play next turn is probably just going to be to run out the Phoenix anyways.
Mm-hmm. Mystical Dispute on Brainstorm.
Oh.
But Memory Lapse available. Still for Romao.
Yeah. Running out Arclight Phoenix is still pretty tempting here. And if that does get memory lapsed next turn, you can just either run it back or play it a Sprite Dragon, play a Faithless Looting, hope to chain some spells together.
Looks like Kuisma may be deciding to run out the Sprite Dragon here.
Yep. Sprite Dragon.
In that case, he'll Faithless Looting.
Yeah, Sprite Dragon into Faithless Looting. Now, Carlos does have perfect information here. Probably just memory lapsing.
And that's going to just be turn. No land played there for
okay.
Kuisma as well. Okay.
Now, Carlos missing on land drops is definitely rough for him. He can run out this Inquisition, though, to at least get that Faithless Looting out of Maddie's hand. Although the other consideration could have been to just pass and cycle Shark Typhoon for 2.
Mm-hmm.
To just trade with the Arclight Phoenix and then Inquisition away the Faithless Looting on the following turn. Right?
Okay.
Because it's a lot less likely for you to be able to cast 3 spells when the Faithless Looting is in the graveyard.
Yeah, this way he's going to be down a card as well, as the tempo can start to add up on you. He does hit a land drop now, but it's kind of an awkward Shark Typhoon situation because he can cycle it to make a 3-3 and trade, but boy, a 4-4 would be so much better.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't have the time for that, though.
Yeah. Now Maddie's just thinking, do I want to run out, the Sprite Dragon into the Brainstorm now? Grow my threats and kind of get in. This feels like a Shark Typhoon here. Or do I want to wait? Do I want to wait? If there is a Shark Typhoon, right, I can wait till the next turn to cast my Brainstorm potentially, right? Get an Arclight Phoenix onto the battlefield, fully maximize that Fabled Passage that I have in hand and kind of go off that way.
Okay, just in the nick of time here for Carlos, he finds Narset Parter Veils off of that cycle.
Oh, I love the classic post-combat sprite dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Makes sense. It's kind of funny. And
Yeah.
because of this Narset now, you're going to see Matti run out this Brainstorm in response here, as of course, once Narset is in play, Brainstorm becomes a very bad Magic card.
A liability, yes. It's one thing when it turns off your card draw, but when it really turns it into a self-discard spell, it's a lot worse.
Graveyard check.
Indeed. Lots of action here for Kuisma.
Yeah, probably shuffling away the Steam Vents, putting Fabled Passage on top. And yeah, we're going to see Finale of Promise for 2 returning Arclight Phoenix, right? And we're also going to see Expressive Iteration. And that's another thing, by the way. You know, we talk about, Iteration just being so great just because it digs you so many cards. You know what it's also good against? Narset. It allows you to actually dig through cards, right? Without actually drawing cards, so it actually does a good job of playing around that as well.
Yeah, that's cool. Narset's going to minus here, see Fatal Push, which is a good answer for the Sprite Dragon, so let's just get rid of that right now, says Carlos Romao.
Right, but we know that Matti's got the Finale of Promise here, which is going to allow him to return Arclight Phoenix, get Narset off the battlefield, and get ahead on cards.
Yeah, the fact that Expressive Iteration fills that 2-mana sorcery spot as well is really nice for the finale. It sometimes struggles, the 1-mana instants are kind of the easy part, but sometimes it's a little tricky, strategic planning or something isn't really where you want to be, but Expressive Iteration is. So the cards are Finale of Promise, which he had put on the top with the Brainstorm, another Brainstorm, and a Sprite Dragon.
Yeah, so probably
A little awkward.
And keep in mind, even if he finds something like a Brainstorm and exiles it, right? As long as he can just wait to cast the Brainstorm after he kills the Narset when he returns this Arclight Phoenix. If he so chooses. So he can go with Finale Promise in hand because that's a 1-card way to guarantee that you can put Arclight Phoenix into play and just choose to play it after you return this Phoenix. And yeah, Opt was basically the only option in the graveyard because you don't want to cast Brainstorm. Still gives you a free scry.
Mm-hmm. All right, Arclight Phoenix takes care of the problem. And, Narset in the graveyard, look at Carlos.
He's got nothing.
What kind of control deck are you, Carlos? It's late in the game. You don't have any cards in your hand.
Yeah, and Matti is not out of gas at all. We've got the Phoenix in play. There's a Sprite Dragon and another Finale of Promise. And look at this. Very heads up too as well. And this is the power of Brainstorm. So many good ways to use it, but another one is, of course, Carlos could top deck a Thoughtseize or some kind of hand disruption spell. So Matti correctly chooses to... and look at this! Plays around a hand disruption spell by hiding the Finale of Promise.
Really smart play there by Matti Kuisma, and it pays off. And now he gets to just go for the blowout here. A completely clear board, no cards in hand. For Carlos Romao means that Finale of Promise can just go.
Yeah, Finale of Promise to basically just draw you 3 cards, right? You can go Expressive Iteration if there is one in the yard. Maybe there isn't.
I think it might be a Faithless Looting might have to be the pick.
Right, then he can go for Faithless Looting plus a Brainstorm. Right. But the thing is, I mean, just a Brainstorm here is fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. You got a Fabled Passage in your hand, so...
Yeah, but both are great. Faithless Looting 2 with 2 lands in hand.
Yep.
Draws an Opt.
And this is also not the worst, just choosing to hold on to the Finale of Promise in case Carlos finds a removal spell, right? Because that just ensures that you're going to be able to get that Phoenix into play next turn.
Another Opt here off of the other Opt. And he's going to play Fabled Passage, get in for 3, and ship the turn back. Ooh,
wow.
Shark Typhoon.
That was
off the top.
Probably the best possible draw here for Carlos.
Probably,
it draws him a card and is a really great answer to just this Arclight Phoenix. Now, Matti... that's a good card. I imagine he's going to want to keep that one, but what he really wants is Petty Theft.
Right, get that shark out of here. There's a fry.
Okay.
And that is actually the right
That is
size
the-
because
oh my
Carlos can
goodness.
make a 5-5.
That's the perfect size.
Oh, the perfect fry. I've been searching for it my whole life, and here it is.
Who doesn't love a perfect fry, though?
No kidding.
Oh,
Nice
Jeez.
and crispy. Shark fries are on the menu. Bzzz, get that thing out of here, and that's really going to put Carlos to pretty much dead here, right? He's facing down 2 lethal threats,
That's
even
not
with the
gonna do it.
removal spell, which is what we see here.
Extinction Event. He can go Castle Lochthwain into Extinction Event. He'll go to 1,
Okay.
but if he finds Extinction Event, he will exile the Arclight Phoenixes.
He's going to play tight here, crack the Fabled Passage first.
Thin out the deck.
That's right. Oh, well, it looks like he might have more individual removal spell outs. So he can go down to 2 here and try to find another Heartless Act, but no.
That's it.
It's going to be Field of Ruin, and Matti Kuisma is actually the first one to defeat Carlos Romao with Izzet Phoenix this weekend. Well played. Really intricate match. Very cool to watch there.